Hello everyone, my name is Clint Plazet, and today I'll be presenting over the ethical themes in Interstellar. So first off, just a quick overview of the film. Interstellar takes place in 2067 as humanity is on the brink of extinction due to a fungus called the blight that is infecting all the crops on Earth and using up all the oxygen in the atmosphere. In an attempt to save humanity, NASA is refunded in secret by the US government, and the top physicist, Professor Brand, comes up with two plans to save humanity. His first plan, or Plan A as it is referred to in the film, takes the form of two crewed missions named the Lazarus and Endurance missions through a wormhole that appeared 50 years prior to the start of the film in order to find a new habitable planet for humanity, and to utilize the gravity equation that he has been working on to transfer all of humanity on Earth to the new planet. His second plan, or Plan B, is to have the crew of the second mission create a new colony of humans on the planet they find by using the frozen embryos that they take with them. After finding out that his gravity equation is unsolvable, Dr. Brand launches the Endurance mission anyways, with the last hope of starting a new colony of humans with the frozen embryos. The film follows the main character, Cooper, as he and his crew embark on the Endurance mission and attempt to find a new habitable planet for humanity. The film has three main ethical dilemmas in it, and it asks the three questions: is the survival of the large majority more important than anything else? Is utilitarianism more ethical than deontology? And should robots be given ethical consideration? So these three questions take the form of the three ethical dilemmas in the film. The first one being that Professor Brand lies to Cooper about his gravity equation. So it's established early on in the film that Cooper's main motivation and goal in life is to raise his children and provide them with a good future. He wants his children to accomplish as much as possible given the current situation. And so when Cooper finds out about the secret NASA facility and is asked by Professor Brand to fly the landers for the Endurance mission, he initially refuses on the basis that finding a new planet and starting a new colony of humans isn't worth his time if it doesn't save his daughter back on Earth, and if there is a slim chance that he comes back from the mission at all. Professor Brand then lies to Cooper, saying he is working on a gravity equation which would enable NASA to transport everyone on Earth to the new planet that Cooper finds. Cooper agrees to fly the mission based on this and leaves his daughter behind on Earth. The next ethical dilemma is the one of the crew members of the Lazarus mission. So this dilemma is defined by the actions of Dr. Mann, choosing to fake the data of his planet rather than accept his fate and die. So while his methods do end up being unethical, the film asks the question: is Dr. Mann's fight for survival any different than anyone else on Earth? Was he in the wrong for wanting to survive? Or was Professor Brand in the wrong for sending him on the Lazarus mission where there was a high chance that he would die? And the last ethical dilemma is that TARS, one of the robots sent on the mission, is jettisoned into the black hole Gargantua. So at the end of the film, the Endurance barely has enough fuel to make it to the last planet that could support human life. And in order to gain enough speed, Cooper and Dr. Brand make a gravity-assisted slingshot around the black hole Gargantua. The Endurance is too heavy to make it with the landers attached, so the landers are used as rocket boosters in the maneuver, and then are jettisoned into the black hole to make the ship lighter. The landers have to be piloted manually by TARS and Cooper jettisons TARS into the black hole without giving him any say in the situation. Alright, so the critical facts in these dilemmas. So the decisions made by the characters in Interstellar are all driven by the impending doom of humanity. If no solution is found to the blight issue, humanity will go extinct. Professor Brand is limited by the resources available to him and is not able to give the crew of the Lazarus mission an escape option if their planet is uninhabitable. Thus, Dr. Mann will die if no one came to save him. And the establishment of a human colony is also the only other plan Dr. Brand has, as he cannot solve his gravity equation to transport humanity off of Earth. And lastly, the robots sent on the mission do not have any sense of self-preservation or survival instinct. Alright, so the stakeholders in these ethical decisions are humanity, Professor Brand, Murph, who is Cooper's daughter, Dr. Mann, Dr. Brand, who is Professor Brand's daughter, Cooper, and the robot TARS. So the stakeholder interests. So first off, we have the human species. So the people on Earth are not really stakeholders in Professor Brand's decision to lie to Cooper. Everyone on Earth was already doomed to die, whether or not Cooper decided to go on the Endurance mission. But the human race as a species, however, would be able to continue existing if Cooper participated on the Endurance mission. Next, we have Professor Brand. So Professor Brand does not care about his own survival. He is only interested in the continuation of humans as a species. And additionally, Professor Brand lies to Cooper about the unsolvable nature of his gravity equation to convince him to participate on the Endurance mission. Next, we have Murph, or Murphy, who is Cooper's daughter, and pretty much just likes her father a lot. She's only a kid when Cooper leaves on the Endurance mission, and because Cooper leaves, she is forced to grow up without her father. So Cooper is the only person who is qualified to fly the landers required for the success of the Endurance mission, and his only goal is to raise his daughter and ensure her survival. Because of this, Professor Brand lies to Cooper about his gravity equation so that Cooper will participate in the Endurance mission. If Cooper knew everyone on Earth was doomed, whether he participated in the mission or not, he would have not have gone and would have instead chosen to stay with his daughter. And then we have Dr. Mann. So Dr. Mann was one of the people sent on the Lazarus mission, and his job was to survey the planet assigned to him and report back whether or not it was suitable for a human colony. The crew of the Lazarus mission were not given any means to escape their planet. In the case that their planet couldn't support any life, the crew members had the option to put themselves into cryosleep, which, if not opened from the outside, would eventually run out of power and kill them in their sleep. Unable to kill himself, Dr. Mann opts to fake his planet's data in order to be able to be rescued by the crew of the Endurance, who had come to his planet to set up the colony. And lastly, we have the robot TARS, who is a utility robot sent on the Endurance mission to help the crew members. He is used for some of the more dangerous tasks, and at the end is jettisoned into the black hole Gargantua in order to complete the mission. Starting off with my analysis of the morality of Professor Brand lying to Cooper about the true fate of humanity and his gravity equation. This decision could be looked at as either right or wrong, depending on if you look at it with a utilitarian set of ethical codes or a deontological set of codes. Professor Brand looks at the situation humanity is in from a utilitarian perspective and bases his actions off of a utilitarian code of ethics. Lying to Cooper so that he leaves his daughter and flies the Endurance mission is ethical to him because even though Professor Brand is lying and deceiving Cooper, it means that the human race has a slim chance at survival. So the crew of the Endurance takes a more deontological approach to this situation. So deontology says that decisions cannot be made solely on their potential outcome, and that the most ethical decisions are those that only rely on what is correct in the present. So when looking at Professor Brand's actions from a deontological point of view, what he did would be considered unethical because Cooper had a right to have all the facts when he decided to go on the Endurance mission, especially because his daughter is so important to him. Because the chances of Cooper returning from the Endurance mission are slim, Cooper should have been allowed to make the decision on whether or not to go on the mission based on the true facts of the situation, and not just what Professor Brand wanted him to believe. Because I subscribe to a more utilitarian approach to ethics, similar to Professor Brand, I would agree with his course of action, and I would say that his decision to lie to Cooper and the rest of the world for the greater good was the most ethical decision in that scenario. So the next ethical dilemma is that Dr. Mann chooses to fake his planet's data in order to survive. So Dr. Mann faces the choice of either falsifying his planet's data in order to be rescued by the crew of the Endurance, or to put himself into cryosleep and eventually die, but by doing so sacrificing himself for the greater good of humanity. So this situation brings up two questions that determine the morality of his actions. Can Dr. Mann be held responsible purely for wanting to save himself? And did Professor Brand make the most ethical decision in sending Dr. Mann on a mission with such a high chance that he would die? So, as discussed previously, Professor Brand takes a utilitarian approach to ethics. To Professor Brand, the Lazarus mission was the most ethical option to take because of the chance that it would save humanity. Additionally, all the crew members of the Lazarus mission knew the danger of signing up for the mission, and none of them were coerced into sacrificing their lives. Professor Brand was also limited by the resources available, and he wasn't able to provide any of the crew members of the Lazarus mission with a means to escape their planet should it be uninhabitable. So, because of these reasons, I think that Professor Brand did make the most ethical choice in sending these people on the Lazarus mission and prioritizing the human race. Um, so, at the beginning of the Lazarus mission, Dr. Mann thought he would be able to do his duty and complete his mission, even if it meant killing himself. And once he realized that his planet was not habitable, his instinct to survive kicked in. Um, so Dr. Mann went on the Lazarus mission, looking at it like a utilitarian, similar to Professor Brand. And once he found out that he couldn't bring himself to commit suicide, his code of ethics changed to one that prioritized his own survival. While it might be easy to say, oh, Dr. Mann should have just accepted his fate and done what was better for humanity, from Dr. Mann's point of view, his survival was just as important as anyone else's, and it makes sense in some ways. I mean, Dr. Mann's life isn't any less important than any other human back on Earth necessarily. Um, However, looking at this dilemma through the work of Ian Saffett from Pace University on the ethics of survival, I think it's clear that the most ethical decision that Dr. Mann could have made in this situation would have been to prioritize the survival of the human race over himself. So, in Ian Saffett's essay, The Ethics of Survival, Responsibility, and Sacrifice in Environmental Ethics, he suggests that everyone has a responsibility to the future of humanity, and that as a moral individual, the self limits oneself in the name of morality, limits unto death without demanding the same from others. And that was a direct quote from his paper. So Dr. Mann had a right to survive just like everyone else, but when he decided to lie about his data and maroon the crew of the Endurance, he chose not to limit himself unto death, instead deciding to attempt to take the lives of Cooper and taking the life of Romilly and prioritizing himself over the future of humanity. And lastly, we have the topic of robot ethics in this film. So the final ethical dilemma in Interstellar is Cooper's choice to jettison TARS into the black hole Gargantua. So this ethical dilemma comes more from TAR's lack of choice in the matter and whether or not he should have had a say in the situation. So if TARS was not jettisoned into the black hole, the whole mission would have failed and humanity would have died out. And according to utilitarianism, and the previous ethics that I mentioned of survival, sacrificing TARS was most likely the most ethical decision in this situation because it saved humanity as a species. And also, if TARS isn't really alive in the first place, it's not unethical to ask him to sacrifice himself, as he wouldn't really be dying either. On top of all this, the film also establishes that the robots in the film have no instinct for survival. And so I guess the only remaining question is, does this mean that they should not receive any ethical consideration at all? So in his paper on whether or not robots require the same ethical considerations as humans, Mohammed Hassan proposes that the desire to survive is the line between an entity that requires ethical consideration and something that exists only to help humans, like a wrench or a screwdriver. So with this evidence, I think that Cooper made the most ethical decision in that situation to jettison TARS into the black hole because he wasn't necessarily alive in the first place, and he had no survival instinct, which means he was really more similar to a tool than a being that required ethical consideration. So the conclusions of this film are that robots do not require ethical consideration; they are just tools. Sacrificing what is right in the moment to save the majority later is the most ethical option, and sacrificing yourself for the greater good is the most ethical decision. So my critique on this is that I would pretty much agree with all the conclusions drawn in this film. I think that the survival of humanity should be prioritized over the survival of just a few people. I think that Dr. Mann was wasn't necessarily wrong for wanting to survive, but he did have a moral obligation to prioritize the survival of humanity over himself when he decided to take on the mission. Um, so he wasn't wrong for wanting to survive, and I would even go as far to say that his decision to falsify the data from his planet wasn't entirely unethical. But by attempting to maroon the crew of the Endurance on his planet, his choices became unethical. And lastly, while TARS does emulate emotion, he is a tool first and does not require the same ethical consideration as a human. Uh, Without the instinct to survive, TARS does not have the same status as a human and therefore does not require the same ethical consideration. He's more like a tool than a self-aware entity.